Hey, friends. I'm so glad that you've joined me for another episode of your Hope-Filled Perspective. So often as parents, we focus on doing all the right things for raising our children, but we give little attention to preparing for life after they fly out of our nest. So today we're going to be talking about reinventing yourself after the empty nest. In her book, Empty Nest, Full Life, Discovering God's Best for Your Next, my guest, Jill Savage, put into words what so many of us parents have been feeling as we've had our children leave the nest, and she's here today to give us hope from her experience. This is another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God-given identity, whether you're raising children now or they've left the nest. But today, I want to introduce to you my friend, Jill Savage. You may remember Jill. Jill and Mark were on a previous episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective, where we talked about hope for rebuilding trust and rebuilding a marriage after cheating and infidelity. Jill is an author and a speaker who's passionate about relationships. She's been called one of today's most exciting female speakers. She's honest and engaging and funny, but shares the real truth as it comes from the Word of God. Jill is the host of the No More Perfect podcast. So when you're done listening to this episode, hop on over to her podcast and take a listen. We will put all of her information in the show notes at Dr. Michelle B. so you can connect with her. But what I want you to know is that Jill is real. She's been through what she talks about. Jill and her husband, Mark, live in Illinois and have 5 children and 8 grandchildren. I'm so glad to have you back to the episode, Jill.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I'm so glad we're talking about this. You and I really needed to talk about this several months ago. Like, I don't know where my head was. I was busy preparing for the empty nest, or so I thought. But here's what I know. Jill is a neuropsychologist. I've helped parents with their parenting skills for almost 30 years. And I was able to guide them and support them. And I was more or less ready when my oldest went off to college. But when my youngest left for college, I was woefully shocked at how unprepared I was for the empty nest.
Yep.
What was your experience like?
I would say I was very similar when my first one left the nest. Now, you have to understand, we had 5 children and they ranged 12 and a half years between the oldest and the youngest.
Okay.
So, and when my oldest was heading off to college, we were adopting number 5. Okay. And we were adopting, he was 9 at the time, and we were adopting him from Russia. So I was very busy. That was, so I mean, I was just navigating the reality of getting her. In fact, she had to move into her college campus while we were in Russia. And so I had to make arrangements for friends and family to make sure she got where she needed to be and all of that. So I feel like that first one, because I still had 4 more at home, right, I was just busy. But by the time you get to that last one, you're not as busy. You're more focused on, oh my goodness, wait a minute. You mean I'm not going to get to do this anymore or that anymore? And you're starting to have all of these, all of these emotions that maybe surprise you. And I certainly found that I was surprised by them. And because honestly, my husband and I can remember when our youngest was getting ready to go off to college. And I had a huge speaking tour that was going to be in Pennsylvania, and it was Pennsylvania and Canada, Michigan, Indiana. I was literally going to be like hopping around, flying to all these places for either interviews or speaking. And one day I said to my husband, hey, wait, you could go with me on this. And he was like, oh my gosh, I could. We had not even thought about that, because he had for so long, he had covered the home front. Anytime I needed to go speak or do TV or radio interviews or whatever for the books. And so we just were assuming I had to do it. And all of a sudden we were like, our son is going to be gone. We
That
will have
sounds
no
really
children.
familiar, Jill.
Really? Yeah. And so it was just this like dawning of, oh my gosh, we have this freedom that we had not even thought about. And so it ended up, we didn't fly that, we drove it, and he went with me. And we made a big long road trip, and we ended up at night going through Niagara Falls and staying a couple of extra days. And it was like, we were like, we really like this empty nest thing, you know? And so 3.5 years later, our youngest, got married, which is when officially the nest is really empty, you know, because when he headed off to college, they still have a bungee cord on them, right? They come back, they leave, they come back, you know. But when he got married, then it was like, oh, this is really going to change. And again, in general, I was okay because we were enjoying this freedom. But I think I was not prepared for the tsunami of emotions. And that's the way I would describe it, because everything is fine and you're doing okay. And then all of a sudden you won't be. For instance, the first time I wasn't was the cereal aisle at the grocery store. When this was like a week after my son got married, and I went to just grab his favorite cereal. And I thought, oh, wait, I don't need to buy this anymore. I mean, I've bought this for 21, 22 years of his life, and I don't need to buy this anymore. And they live an hour from us. It's very unlikely they're even going to be staying in our home anymore. So it's not like they're going to be coming visiting. And I literally had a meltdown in the cereal aisle and that was a tsunami, because it was a realization.
Yep.
And I think that's what surprises us, is
Like
just
grief.
those moments.
Don't you?
Yes.
Grief, but it's not a grief like someone died, but it's like many griefs at unexpected times.
Yes. And I would say, yes, it's grief upon grief upon grief. And they're small, but they're things that we as mothers loved.
And
right.
I have sons, and I think that's hard for them to relate to. Why is mom struggling with this? Like, they are so happy, and I want them to be that happy. But part of me is like, but I miss you. Don't you miss me? You know? But I want them to be happy. Like, I would not want them off at their job or their college and crying all the time because they want to come home. I don't want that. I'm so happy that they are where God has them. But it is grief for me as a mom. My husband's dealing with it a whole lot better than I am.
Yes. And that is to be expected. I mean, I think that is pretty common, that a lot of times husbands and wives are very different with that. It hits them in very different ways, but it's definitely, I think it is a grief too, because those are the things that moms love doing. Like, I love taking care of my son. I loved that, and buying his favorite cereal. I loved that. I loved back to school shopping. I loved getting the kids ready. And that was another tsunami for me, was when we got to August of that next year. My son got married in December. Well, come August, everybody's talking about back to school. And I'm going, oh, wait a minute. I don't get to do that anymore. And so that was another place. And so it's even recently, okay, I've now been an empty nester this 4 years. In fact, today that you and I are recording this is my son's 4th anniversary, wedding anniversary. And so I have been doing this for 4 years, but I just saw, as I was scrolling through Facebook, I saw somebody and they were decorating Christmas cookies with their kids. And I went, oh, I so loved that.
Yeah.
I so loved that. And I will say, we have grandkids, and I'm grateful that we have a great relationship with our grandkids. And I do get to do some of those things over again. In fact, that's one of the things that I do say is I like to call the empty nest season of life is your encore season. And the reason I like to call it your, if you've ever to the show and you've gone to a musical and at the end they do an encore, or they even sometimes do a reprise. So an encore is when they go back and get to sing a favorite song again. A reprise is when they go back and they get to sing multiple songs that was in the musical. They get to kind of sing the best parts of them. Well, I think that's what we get to do in the empty nest season of life. And whether if you have grandkids, you can often do that with your grandkids. So I can do Christmas cookies with my grandkids, and I'm grateful I can do that. And I can send them home at night, and their parents have to deal with the rest of it.
I'm not quite there yet, but I'm not in a hurry.
No, but you know what? You don't even have to be a grandparent, because sometimes that's not the way it's going to work out. You still can have a reprise of some of your favorite things. You can still have an encore season. You just may have to find those experiences outside of the family. There are children in your neighborhood who do not have grandparents nearby. There are families in your church that don't have grandparents nearby, and those parents desperately need a night out, or they need a break. There are schools that need volunteers. There are nonprofit organizations that need your skills. So the things that you loved doing when you were raising your kids, you can still do those things, just in different environments. And so, it is a new season of new opportunities, but it doesn't mean that all of those old things aren't going to be experienced again.
That's so good. Friends, we're going to take a real quick commercial break, but stick with us, because when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation with Jill Savage about reinventing yourself after the empty nest. We'll be right back. Welcome back to your Hope-Filled Perspective, where I am talking with author and friend Jill Savage about the empty nest, reinventing yourself after the empty nest. This is her book, Empty Nest, Full Life. And we will give you all the information about Jill, her books, her ministries in my show notes that you can get at drmichelleb.com. Jill, I really want to talk about how do we reinvent ourselves in this empty nest, because I think that's been one of the hard things for me, is really wrestling with, who am I now? I'm still mom, but I'm not active in the day to day. My kids are out of state, but what do we need to let go of as parents in order to reinvent ourselves after the empty nest?
Right. Because if we don't learn to let go, we don't have the ability to hold on to the new stuff. We gotta, and that is one of the hardest things. When I wrote Empty Nest Full Life, it actually came out of one of my quiet times. I was reading in the book of Ecclesiastes, and I ran across the verses that talk about in everything there is a season, a time to laugh, a time to cry. And I was in the particular version that I was reading, one of the a time twos was a time to hold on and a time to let go. And honestly, I gasped when I read that. Like, I was like, oh, Lord, Lord, if I can figure out what I need to let go of and what I need to hold on to, I think I can better navigate this empty nest.
Mhm.
And so that just became a real personal journey for me to figure that out. And then ultimately, because that made such a difference for me, I knew I had to put it in a book form, so other moms could better understand that. So the first thing I think is really important, is to understand you will always be a mother, but you are no longer parenting them. And so there's a difference in that. And you got to get that in our heads. We got to get that in our heads, because if we can get that in our head, it will help us lay the groundwork for these things that we need to let go of. All right. So one of the first things that is important for us as parents, empty nest parents, to let go of is expectations.
That's a hard one.
It is a hard one because, I once heard somebody say expectations are preconceived resentments.
Oh,
And isn't that good?
that's really good. Say that again, Jill.
Expectations are preconceived resentments. And they are. And this is where a lot of frustration happens for empty nest parents, is because their expectations get dashed. And I mean, this can show up in so many different ways. It can show up in our expectations as it relates to the pace of communication. So I have 5 kids, and let me tell you, I talk to all 5 of those kids at very different paces.
Mhm.
I talk to a couple of them almost daily. I talk to a couple of them weekly to every other week, and I talk to one of them monthly. And that is normal for all of those kiddos. And I've had to learn how to be okay that they have different paces, how to not expect them to communicate at the pace that I would prefer or I would like. So that changing my expectation and being content with who they are and what's going to be realistic for them has really made a huge difference. Another expectation, expecting their priorities to be the same as yours. They now choose their own priorities. You got to determine their priorities for 18 years.
Right.
You did. You got to call the shots on that. And now they get to call the shots on that for their life. And man, that isn't always easy. But if I can change my expectation to realize, hey, they might have different priorities than me. Their priority of family or even time with extended family may not be at the same level of priority that I am. They're still figuring this out. Their priority of faith and having God in their life may not be the same. I trained them for that priority to be at the top of the priority list, but now they get to decide. They get to walk that out. They got to figure it out. And so
they get the consequences of their choices. Whereas when we were actively parenting, we had to answer to God.
Yes. And now they have to answer to God and only to God. It is not their job to answer to us anymore, but they have to answer to God. So letting go of that expectation that their priorities will be the same has been huge. So I think in general, letting go of expectations, the higher our expectations are, the more discontentment we will experience.
Yes.
And I'll tell you another place that you have to deal with expectations is around holidays, birthdays, those kind of things, because you had things that you did as a family. You had your traditions, right? And every family has them to some degree. And now those are going to change. You need to expect them to change. You need to expect that they will, that things will look differently. And so adjusting and getting your head and your heart into that place will make such a difference. So we got to let go of expectations. Another one that we've really got to let go of is opinions. This one's really hard for us too, because we've been leveraging our opinions in their life for a long time. And our opinions come from experience, right? It's hard earned experience, lessons learned, all of that. And our sense of right and wrong. But now they have to walk that out themselves. So I like to say that those in the empty nest season of life, there are two things we need to do when it comes to our opinions. One is we need to understand that we belong to the Keep It Shut Club. That if we're asked for our opinion, we can offer it by all means, because we want to be that coach for them if they want us to be that coach. So if they want to come and say, what should I do? Help me think through this. I need your wisdom. I'd love your thoughts. By all means, share them. But if they don't, we belong to the Keep It Shut Club. And so the best way I have found to remember and to figure out what to do with that is a little, it's just a little thing that I memorize and I preach to myself. Pray, don't say. All right, Lord, I'm just going to pray it. I'm not going to say it. If the door opens, like they ask, and you give me the opportunity to say with an invitation, I will. But at this point, I need to let go of my opinions and my thoughts and telling them what to do, because it's not my role anymore. I'm no longer their parent. I am still their mother, but I'm no longer their parent. And so I have to pray, not say.
That's really good.
And that is hard, but important.
It is hard.
Yeah.
And you want to be needed still, and you want your opinion to be valued still.
Yeah. But they have to figure this out.
Yeah.
They have to walk the journey. They are accountable to God. And so we have to recognize that is, we've led them to this point, and now they have to walk it out. And so letting go of opinions is so important. But here's what happens when we let go of opinions: we become a safe person to be around.
Yeah.
Honestly, when a child, an adult child, doesn't want to be with their parent, sometimes their perspective is skewed. Okay. Sometimes their perspective is skewed, and this is a part of the letting go process and all of that. But sometimes we as parents need to look at how much we try to tell our kids what to do.
Mm.
And sometimes we're creating an unsafe environment for our adult kids to have a relationship with us. They don't want to call home because they get a lecture. So we really do hold the keys somewhat to what that relationship will look like with our kids. And we need to be willing to look at what we've brought if there's maybe hurt in that relationship in some way. And a lot of times we don't realize it. And it's like, well, I'm their mother. I should be able to tell them what I think, or I should be able. And it's like, yeah, you could, up until they were on their own, but you don't actually have that leverage in their life anymore. And
what
so
I found is by letting go of some of those expectations
Yeah.
and biting my tongue when I would like to give an opinion. It actually means more to me as a mom when I hear from one of my boys in a text or something that says, I have so much to tell you, I can't wait to share with you.
Yes.
Then it means
Yes.
so much because they're coming on their own because they want to share their life with me. And I love that. I love just getting the call saying, hey, mom, I was just thinking about you. Don't really have anything to tell you, but you're on my
Yeah,
mind today. That makes like my whole week.
it does.
But I'll
It
have to,
does.
in all honesty, before my oldest went off to college, in my head, because I saw how other parents did it with their kids, I thought, oh, well, we were going to have a Sunday night call every Sunday night and find out what what was going on. I think we
Yeah,
had one Sunday night call in the history of my oldest being in college, but it means more than when they reach out.
it does. And sometimes that's delayed. Sometimes it takes them a while to figure that out. They're so enjoying their independence, and it has nothing to do with you. In fact, one of the things that I have learned is, I mean, oftentimes we want to view this as rejection. We do. But our kids, this is not a rejection of you. It's a reflection of them beginning to flap their wings and fly away. And so, for that mom that is like, oh, I wish that I was getting the text that says, oh, I've got so much that I want to tell you, and they're not getting that. I want you to know it may take time. It may take time, and that's okay. It's not a rejection of you. Do not look at this as a rejection of you. Look at it as a reflection of their learning how to navigate their adulthood, learning how to navigate adult relationships, learning how to figure out the balance between work and school and home and people, learning how to navigate the people and the relationships in their life, So I think that's really important for us to understand.
Important. Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
What about the mom who's invested everything, into raising her kids? I can even tell you for myself, I raised my boys with the mentality that I wanted to give them wings to fly.
Yes.
So I think that's why I had the difficulty with the adjustment, because I was like, you raised them to do what they're doing. But
Yep.
I wasn't prepared, and I'm thrilled that they are. I'm so
Yeah.
excited. They're both doing what God wanted them to do, and I can see the joy in them. But I was unprepared for how I would feel when they flew away,
Yeah.
many hours away.
I understand that. I have one in Australia, so I
Oh,
really
okay. I can't
understand that.
complain. No, I can't complain.
Yeah. Well, I think that is the confusing part of it, is because, I mean, even those of us that were the most prepared, because we knew that we were working ourselves out of a job as a parent.
Yes.
So ultimately, we've known this is what it was going to be like, and that this is what was going to happen. And it's ultimately what we want. That still doesn't take away the emotional impact on our heart.
Right.
And it doesn't take away those things that you and I talked about earlier, that we grieve, because we loved. There are so many aspects that we loved about motherhood. There's so many aspects that we loved about raising a family. And then, not to mention, I mean, all of this happens when we're hitting midlife ourselves, when we're experiencing a drop in our estrogen, and we're going through perimenopause or menopause, and that doesn't help any of that.
You're right.
So you gotta look that this is an emotional thing, but it's probably a physical thing
Yeah.
mixed with the emotion.
Yep.
And so I think I think we underestimate the emotional impact and the physical parts that are going on just with aging as we navigate the empty nest. And all of that comes together. And I think all of that makes it even more challenging. And then, we haven't even talked about, you've said both of your kids are doing extremely well and they're, but then you add in the possibility of a kid that's not doing well.
Yes.
And that's another let go of. I've come to understand is let go of your child's problems. And we've found that with several of our kids, they have not flourished. Well, particularly one of our kids has not flourished as an adult. He has a lot of mental health issues. He has a lot of psychological issues. And he just, he survives. He doesn't thrive. And then that weighs on a mama's heart. Absolutely. Right. Yep. So, there's just a lot of emotional upheaval, and all the reason that our faith is an important part of this journey, all the more reason, because our world is kind of shifting. And if we don't have that solid rock to stand on, then we get affected so much more by the shifting. Yes. And not only that, another thing that I talk about in the Empty Nest Full Life book is we've got to let go of idols. Sometimes we have made our children's success an idol in our heart, or we've made our children's choices an idol in our heart. And this comes to our faith journey, is we got to be willing to take a look at those things that maybe we are, well, I'll give you an example. Worry can become an idol. Worry is the worship of our circumstances, or maybe it's the worship of our child's circumstances. Well, God's the only one we need to worship. Worship is simply a focus on something. Yeah. And so, again, it comes back to our faith journey. We really need that foundation of faith that will help us to sort out what's going on inside our head and our heart, that will help us to make sure that we are worshiping God and God alone, not circumstances and challenges and fretting and controlling, all of those pieces that really can be addressed in God's word, in God's truth, in our faith journey. And so I think this is a beautiful season of life, that if your faith got pushed a little bit to the back burner, it's time to bring it to the front burner. Absolutely. Because he's going to walk us through this, and he is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Our world is not the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Our home life is not the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Our traditions are not the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But our God is the same. And we need that steadiness in the midst of the empty nest transitions.
So good. Friends, this is such good wisdom from Jill Savage, author of Empty Nest Full Life. We're going to take a real quick commercial break, but stick with us. When we come back, I'm going to ask Jill just a couple more questions about reinventing ourselves after the empty nest, and ask her to share with you her hope-filled perspective. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Your Hope-Filled Perspective. Today's guest is Jill Savage, and we've been talking about reinventing ourselves after the empty nest. Jill, really, what does this mean for our next season? How do we reinvent ourselves? How do we thrive through this empty nest season?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, Isaiah 43:19 from the Message says this, and I love this phrasing: be alert, be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it? I love that. To me, that's what the empty nest season of life
Mm.
is about. That's what reinventing ourselves or exploring what God has for us, that's the heart of it. That is the holding on part of it. And so when we think about this, I mean, I talk about, I think it's 5 things that we need to hold on to in the book. So we need to hold on to our new mission field, our new passions, new friendships, our marriage, if we're married, and we need to hold on to God's hand. So let's talk about just a few of those. Is that, and we talked about them a little bit earlier, is there are so many opportunities out there that that need our experience, our wisdom, our talents, our skills. We may need to do some exploring to find that. And so, especially if motherhood has been your full-time job for 20 plus years, it may be time to brush off the resume and think about whether you want to go back in the workforce, or maybe you continue. I always say that motherhood is the ministry of availability. It just naturally is. But guess what? You can keep doing the ministry of availability even after your kids are grown and gone. I'll give you a perfect example. I have a friend, my friend Becky, and Becky has, she's in her late 60s. Her son is 36. So she's been an empty nester now for 16 years. And she really views that is her calling, that her calling in her empty nest years is the ministry of availability. And I'm telling you, she just loves on people in very practical ways. Now, when my kids were still at home, Becky would call me and she would say, "Hey, I've got Thursday free. What can I do for you?" And she was like, "What project is bugging you? What can I come help you do?" And literally, sometimes she'd come and help me. We'd sort through the toys in the toy room. Sometimes she'd help me sort through photos in photo albums. Sometimes she'd help me get ready for one of my kids' graduation parties. Literally, she just is an extra set of hands.
Wow.
And yesterday, she was at my house. She had called me and said, "Hey, I've got Monday available. Is there anything you need to do?" And I said, "Yes, we need to reorganize our office." And she was like, "I'll be there. Let's do it." And I literally just, could hand her stacks of things and she'd go, "Okay, and she went through it and, "Okay, this is this stack and this is this." Ministry of availability. She couldn't do that if she was working a full-time job. Yeah. She sees that as her job. So sometimes we just really need to think outside the box and go, what is it, Lord, that you want me to do in this season of my life? How do you want me to use my skills? Maybe what friendships got put on the back burner that it's time to bring them up to the front burner again? What friendships did I think I had? But now I find out, I like to call them, they were bleacher butt friends. In other words, we sat in the bleachers together. We sat at the school musicals together. I thought they were friends, but they were convenience friends. Now, do I want to move some of those to real friendships outside of convenience? Or do I need to start fishing in a different pond and find some different relationships in this season of my life? So I think that, a big part of it is to go into it with open hands and say, "All right, Lord, what do you have for me? I'm excited. What is it that's bursting out?" And that the possibilities, help me to see that. Help me to see that more than I see the loss. Because I want to see the gains. I want to see what it is that I get to experience in this season of life that maybe I've not been able to see up to this point.
That's such wise words. Jill, as we wrap up the show, it's called Your Hope-Filled Perspective. And if a listener is resonating with today's conversation and is struggling with the empty nest, what hope-filled perspective would you want to leave them with today?
Oh, God has so much for you in this season of life. He has, and honestly, he's whispering, well done. You didn't do it perfectly. None of us did, but you've done well. And wait till you see what I've got for you now. That's the hope of the emptiness season.
I love that. I'm going to cling to that. Friends, Jill is just a wealth of wisdom. I hope that you will pick up her book, Empty Nest, Full Life, Discovering God's Best for You Next. She's got several other books. She's got the No More Perfect podcast. We will put all of her information in the show notes at drmichelleb.com. But if you know a friend who's about to enter into the empty nest, maybe is approaching it with a little fear and trepidation, or maybe even some excitement, consider sharing this episode, because I can tell you, as someone who prepared my kids to leave the nest, as someone who helped guide other parents along their parenting journey for so many years, I wasn't prepared. And Jill's book and her resources will help get you there. Jill, thank you so much for sharing of your wisdom. Would you consider closing out this episode with a prayer for that one who's going into that empty nest or might be there now?
Absolutely. Oh, Lord, thank you so much for just this opportunity to have an honest conversation about the good parts of the empty nest, but the hard parts. I pray, Father, for that mom that is listening today that just needs to know that, yes, there are parts that will change, but that her life is not over. You have so much more for her in this next season of life. So I pray, Father God, that she would move her eyes from lack to abundance, and that she would be excited, begin to experience an excitement about what it is that you have in this next season of life for her. Lord, help each one of us to know what to let go of and what to hold on to. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Friends, this has been another episode of Your Hope-Filled Perspective. I've been your host, Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Until we meet again next week, may you have a hope-filled week.